Okay, so I'm going to go through a different method of how to extract the data from a data set into tables. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to map it out on paper first. Credit to Mr. Morris for advising me on this method. So let's jump straight in. So our first task with this method is to identify all of our IDs. So we've got three obvious ones: ticket type ID, customer ID, and customer type ID, and then a not so obvious one. But basically, one of the ways of doing this is to think, well, okay, on its own, what information is it giving me? And the ticket number isn't really showing me any value, so we're going to include it because it looks like an ID. It's not starting at 1 and it doesn't say ID, but it's there anyway. So what we do is we go to our mind map and we're going to take our 4 IDs, so ticket number, ticket type ID, customer ID, and we're going to write them. Now I'm trying to write with a mouse, which isn't going to be helpful, so let's just do our best. Got ticket number, pop that in a box. We've got ticket type ID, ticket type. Oh, it's terrible trying to write with a mouse. Ticket type ID, customer ID, customer ID. Sorry about the writing. I need to get myself a pen. And customer type ID. So that's our first task. So now we know we've got 4 tables. So each one of these will be a table. So we'll have tickets, customers, customer types, and ticket types. Now we need to find out what fields go with what table. So we go back to our table. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the obvious ones first. So what goes with ticket number? Well, that's not obvious. However, let's start with our customers. Now these seem fairly obvious. We're looking at forename, surname, and probably telephone. Ticket type, ticket cost, and ticket number don't seem to go with that, but let's just double check. So if we group our IDs in our customer IDs, and then we'll see if they exactly match any other columns. So forename, ID 1, Mildred, ID 2, Amanda, blank space, ID 3, Eric, blank space, ID 4, Ralph, ID 5, Ruby. So they match, so that's great. So what we'll do, customers will add forename. So forename is going to be part of our customers table. Let's go back and try another one. We're going to try surname because we think that should match. So Mitchell matches 1, Ferguson matches 2, this Ferguson matches 3, it's a different Ferguson. Martinez matches 4, Butler matches 5, and all the blank space match. Brilliant. So now we can say, okay, I'm going to say surname is part of our customers table. And we thought telephone would probably be part of it as well. So the first 2 match with ID 1. That one matches with ID 2. These 2 match with ID 3. That matches with ID 4. That matches with ID 5. And all the blank spaces match together. So telephone is part of our customers. So we've got telephone in there as well. Great. So what we'll do is we'll mark these columns as done. So let's mark, we've got rid of forename, we've got rid of surname, customer ID's done, and telephone's done. So what have we got left? So let's have a look for any more obvious ones. Well, customer type ID and customer type stands out. Let's just double check. We've got ID 3, ID 1, ID 2, ID 1, and ID 3. So 3 matches guest of organizer, and it matches down here as well. So ID 3 is guest of organizer, great. ID 1 matches regular, and it matches down here as well. So ID 1 is regular. The blank spaces match, and then ID 2 matches new. Brilliant. So customer type ID, we know we've got customer type as well. That's part of that table, and that means nothing else seems to match there. We could check, but we'll leave it for now. We'll go with the obvious ones first, and then we'll work things out later. So we've done customer type ID and customer type. So all we've got is ticket number, ticket type ID, ticket cost, and ticket type. Well, ticket number looks a bit confusing and difficult. So let's have a look at the ticket type ID. If there's a block there, a block there, a block there. So ticket cost, well, £39 matches ID 1, £49 matches ID 2, £88 matches ID 3. So we can say ticket cost is part of ticket number. I beg your pardon, I'm so silly. Ticket cost is part of ticket type ID. What else have we got? Got ticket type. Well, that seems a very obvious match. Fridays match with 1, Saturdays match with 2, camping matches with 3. Brilliant. So ticket type we'll also put in our ticket type ID table. That's it, apart from ticket number. But we know ticket number is an ID on its own, so that can't be part of that table. You can't put an ID inside a different table. So we've got rid of all of our ticket type ID, ticket cost, and ticket type. Now that just leaves ticket number, which we know is on its own table. So there's no fields to go in there at the moment because there's nothing left. So we've done with part 1. Now part 2, we need to work out the relationships between these tables. So let's have a look and let's try and find out. So again, we'll start with the obvious ones. So we'll have a look at what's a good suggestion is that customer ID and customer type ID probably go together. There's probably some relationship. And we can think about this. A customer has a type. Like in the real world, a customer would have a customer type. Now let's just check what kind of relationship we've got. So we've got customer IDs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We can ignore the spaces because they all match. So we can see the customer ID 1 has one type. Customer ID 2 has one type. Customer ID 3 has one type. Customer ID 4 has one type, and customer ID 5 has one type. So that would suggest that that's a 1-to-1. But if we look at customer type ID to customer ID, we can see that customer type ID 3 appears twice, and customer type ID 1 appears twice, which means customer ID 3 customer type ID 3 is customer ID 1 and customer ID 4. And customer type ID 1, beg your pardon, let's start again with that. I don't want to confuse you. Let's have a look at that again. So, customer type ID 3 appears there and there. So customer type ID 3 is customer ID 1 and customer ID 5, which means one customer type ID can have many customer IDs. And customer type ID 1 also has many because it has 4 and 2. So basically, it's not a 1-to-1 relationship, it's a 1-to-many. Customer type ID 3, so one customer type ID has 2 customer IDs, so 1-to-many. Customer ID 1, so one customer type ID has 2 customer IDs. So this is a 1-to-many relationship. So one customer type ID can have many customers. Great. So we've got one relationship nailed down already. So now I'm going to apply another bit of logic, and I'm going to think about the situation. Would a customer have a ticket type? Possibly. I don't think they would, to be fair. I don't think a customer would have a ticket type, but we can check. So if we look at our customer IDs, we have 5 IDs and then blank spaces. So in effect, we have 6 different values in the customer ID table. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and null or blank. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and all the blanks. So let's check that with the customer ticket type. So if we look at ticket type ID 1, so 1 ticket type ID, well, it could be a 1 ID in the customer table. So one customer ID 1, customer ID 2, or customer ID nil or null. So that would be a one-to-many relationship. Same with 2. 2 could be 3 or blank. So that's a one-to-many. And 3 could be 4, 5 or blank. But if we check the other way, so always check both ways. If we look at the blanks, which we can effectively say is one value in the customer ID table, if we look at the blanks, well, that could be a 2 or a 1 or a 3. So that's actually a one-to-many relationship as well. One customer ID, in this case blank, matches multiple ticket type IDs. So this is actually a many-to-many relationship, because one ticket type ID could match many customer IDs, and one customer ID could match many ticket type IDs. We don't want many-to-many relationships. So there's no relationship between customer ID and ticket type ID. We're not going to connect them. Now, we could also check whether customer type ID and ticket type ID match by doing the same thing. But a quick glance, if we look at the null values, we can see that that could be 3, 2, or 1. And if we look at the first lot of ticket type IDs, we could see that's 3, 1, and blank. So that's another many-to-many relationship, which we don't want. So there's no relationship between customer type ID and ticket type ID. Now we do have to connect all these tables together, which means we can assume if there's no relationship between customer type ID and ticket type ID, and no relationship between customer ID and ticket type ID, there must be a relationship between ticket type ID and ticket number, and at the moment our database isn't interconnected. We've got these two tables connected and these two tables connected, but there's no connection between them. Now, because customer ID doesn't match with ticket type ID, we know that there must be a relationship here. Now all we need to know is which way that relationship goes. So let's go back and let's check. Let's start with our customer ID and ticket number. So our customer IDs, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and blank. And blank is kind of one field. Now, blank matches with 1003, 1006, 1007, and 1010. So that's a one-to-many relationship. One customer ID can match many ticket numbers. Again, customer ID 1 matches 2 ticket numbers. Customer ID 3 matches 2 ticket numbers. So that's a one-to-many. And we'll do it the other way around as well, just to double check. So ticket number 1000 only represents customer ID 1. So that's 1-to-1. Customer ID, ticket number 1001 only matches customer ID 1. None of these ticket numbers matches multiple IDs. So we do have a one-to-many relationship, not a many-to-many relationship. So that'll draw that in. So what we've got is one customer ID can be many ticket numbers. So, oops. One customer ID, many ticket numbers. And then the same principle for our ticket type IDs, and we'll just ticket type ID 1 matches 4 ticket numbers. So that's a one-to-many relationship. We don't need to check the rest. However, going back the other way, same pattern. Ticket number 1000 only matches one ticket type ID. Ticket number 1001 only matches one ticket type ID. So it's a one-to-many relationship going that way, whereby one ticket type ID can match many ticket numbers, but one ticket number only ever matches one ticket type ID. So we've got a one-to-many relationship there. Brilliant. We have designed our database. The only thing that's left to do now is actually to create that database and put the relationships in. So what we need to do is we add our tables. So we've got our customer type table, customer type with customer type in it. So we've got customer type ID, customer type ID, which is our primary key, and customer type. So customer type ID, primary key, customer type. We've got our customers table, which has 4 fields: customer ID, forename, surname, tel. However, get rid of these first. However, we know we need a one-to-many relationship between customer type ID and customer ID. And we know that the foreign key needs to go in the many side. So our foreign key is going to go in the customers table. Hence, we have customer type ID in the customers table. That's our foreign key. This is how we're going to make that connection between them. So when we're actually creating these tables, we would link those two and enforce referential integrity. So you drag that way. You drag from customer type the primary key to the foreign key, but you would have to put the foreign key in first. So just to reiterate, the foreign key goes into the table with the many. So customer type ID goes into the customers table. Then we just simply do the rest. Ticket type ID into ticket number. So that would be the foreign key goes in the ticket number table. Customers into ticket numbers. That would be the foreign key goes in the ticket number table. So we've got our ticket type table. Ticket type ID, ticket cost, ticket type. And we've got our tickets table, which is tickets, no other values apart from we've got a foreign key for ticket type ID and a foreign key for customer ID. So we've got the primary key, ticket number, plus a foreign key for customer ID and a foreign key for ticket type ID. And then all we would do is we would drag from primary key to foreign key, from primary key to foreign key. And that's it. Now, I'm not going to actually do it in the database. I'm not going to create these tables. But hopefully, this gives you a different method that you can use. Now, it's a systematic method, and you have to be careful about it. But just to reiterate, step 1, you pull out all the primary keys. That's, all the IDs, basically. And you pop them in your diagram. They're going to form the basis of your tables. 4 IDs, 4 tables. Next step, you look for obvious matches. So customer ID, obvious match, forename, surname, telephone. Check them out, make sure that they match. So Mildred matches ID 1, Amanda matches ID 2, Eric matches ID 3, Ralph 4, Ruby 5, all the blanks match. Mitchell 1 1, Ferguson matches 2, Ferguson matches 3, Martinez matches 4, Butler matches 5, all the blanks the same. That number matches 1, that number matches 2, that number matches 3, that matches 4, that matches 5, all the blanks the same. Ticket type ID, well, ticket type makes sense and they all match. Those match those, those match those, those match those. Also ticket cost, all those match those, those match those, those match those. Great, so that's ticket cost. Customer type ID, well that seems fairly obvious. Those match, those match, those match, those match, those match. So that gives us our fields that go into each of these tables. And then the relationships part, where we're looking for obvious relationships between them. So for example, customer type and customer ID. And then we're checking both ways. So customer ID 1 matches 1 value, customer ID 2 matches 1 value, customer ID 3 matches 1 value, customer ID 4 matches 1 value, customer ID 5 matches 1 value, so that's 1 to 1. However, if we go the other way, customer ID type ID 3 matches 2 customer IDs, and customer type ID 1 matches 2 customer IDs. So that's actually a 1 to many, as in one customer type ID can match multiple customer types. So that's our first relationship, 1 to many between customer type ID and customer ID, or 1 to many. Looking back, customer ID and ticket type ID don't match because you've got one ticket type ID can match many customer IDs, and also one customer ID, so blank in this case, can match many ticket type ID. Many to many, don't want it. However, we need to go there, we just need to check which way. So one customer ID matches many ticket numbers, one ticket type ID matches many ticket numbers. 1 to many, 1 to many. Primary keys on the many side, foreign keys on the many side. So foreign keys on the many side. And then you just draw your relationships in. Bada bing, bada boom. Job's a good one. Sorry this video was quite long. Hopefully you found that useful. If you've got any questions, you can always ask me.